Hello and welcome to Culture Clash with me, Peter Whittle. Tonight, at the end of a week which saw the leaking of an internal BBC report which seemed to suggest that the corporation is taking accusations of bias seriously enough at least to discuss them, we're going to be focusing on the small screen and exploring quite how the broadcasting media's worldview shapes its non-news programmes. We'll be discussing the BBC drama Spooks, looking back at Channel 4's much-trumpeted Monday night Dispatches discussion on Muslims and free speech. And with the departure from our screens of Prime Suspect after 7 series, we'll be asking whether, in the age of digital channeling, we will ever look on its like again. Joining me tonight are South Bank Show Senior Producer and Director Susan Shaw, writer and broadcaster Douglas Murray, Dawn Steeves from the New Criterion magazine, and Marc Sidwell of the Henry Jackson Society. Welcome, good to see you all again. I wanted to start really by, this has been a week when we've had a lot of discussion of the BBC and bias in the BBC, but the best way to start it maybe is by looking at Spooks, which is a highly popular drama series. This has really caused quite a lot of comment this week, and not for the first time. But I wondered, you saw it, didn't you, Douglas? What was the gist of this story that has basically got a lot of people hot under the collar?
Well, it's not any single story. The problem with Spooks, which incidentally, it ought to be said, is a very, very well-acted, very well-made drama. Superb cast and some of the best script writing, I think, as well on television at the moment. But nevertheless, it's been going off several series now, and something really has just sort of come to the boil about this, because in the very first series, Spooks did a single episode about a Muslim suicide bomber, which you'd have thought for a drama about the intelligence services would be a fairly major plotline these days. But instead, I mean, the Muslim thing has become this sort of elephant in the room of this program, and week after week, it's just been going to more extraordinary lengths to avoid it. I mean, we had Christian suicide bombers, we've had animal rights nuts, we've had just about everything imaginable, other than the Muslim thing coming back. And then there was this two-parter in which it seemed that they were actually addressing a Muslim terror threat. And it turned out in this two-parter that they weren't Muslims, they were Jews. It was all run by Mossad. And that was bad enough, but they sort of made their error even more egregious by the next week having another plot in which it was Mossad that was the problem. Now, if the BBC just came out about this and said, as I think they should, OK, we're cowards, we don't want to tackle the real thing. The one time we did address it in the first series, we had a lot of complaints, a lot of flack, we don't want it again. If they did that, then we might be more sort of receptive to it. But quite frankly, at the moment, it's a fictional series that's in the realm of fantasy.
Yes, yes. As you say, it is very well made, isn't it? I wonder, sort of, really, Dawn, I mean, how much effect would a drama series have on people watching it in terms of actually influencing what they thought about an issue?
I think that there is a fear from the people that I talk to who watch Spooks, and I've been watching it regularly, is that people are going to become anti-Muslim. That's what I hear, and I'm like, how can this be possible? That's not what, I mean, if anything, it's anti-Jewish.
They're going to become anti-Jewish.
They're anti-Jewish, and, you know, this absolutely is like, the Israelis going to Gitmo. I was like, oh my goodness.
That's right,
because the Americans are evil for running Gitmo the way they run, you know. So it has a huge impact, but not the way that we would expect it at all. And it has nothing to do with the facts that are really real threats to the country.
But also, isn't it, I mean, it's particularly important given that it's about Secret Service people, isn't it? And I mean, you know, isn't that the most, it is, isn't it? It's the most, it is the most sensitive area, isn't it? But I mean, is it the fact that, as well, you think that we get used to seeing a certain line put out even in drama? I mean, don't you think, I mean, even down to EastEnders, if you like, when it comes to dramatic output on the BBC, we sort of expect, don't we, a kind of particular line?
Well, I think Tom Leonard, writing in the Daily Telegraph, made a very important contribution by saying that actually you can probably get a clearer view of the BBC's overall mindset, if you like, from its drama, comedy and entertainment problems than from strictly its news programs, where they're much more conscious of the possibility that they're going to be accused of bias in any particular direction. I mean, for me, in some ways, the terms of the debate themselves are ludicrous in that I would question whether or not any strain of journalism can be objective. I would argue that the BBC is clearly informed by a tradition of liberal humanism. Why not actually defend that tradition of liberal humanism, which includes a tradition of free speech? It's evident all across their drama output, and probably nowhere more visible than in its comedy programmes. But I completely agree with your critique of Spooks. And what sort of interests me overall, and this links very strongly into Prime Suspect, I don't know if we're ready to move on to that.
A bit later, yeah.
Yeah, is that there's a sort of hypocrisy that operates in a great deal of contemporary television drama, which avails itself of multicultural paranoia, of that feeling that it maybe you maybe are going to be attacked by that rather worrying-looking black kid on the Sink estate, or the threat, the Muslim terrorist threat as it appeared to be in Spooks. It plays on our paranoia about that, and it goes, no, but hang on, you get it all wrong. They're Israelis after all.
Actually, I was going to ask, you mentioned this Tom Leonard piece, which I thought was very good in the Telegraph. It has been one of many because of this. This particular report that was, I think it was in the Mail on Sunday last week, or should I say it was actually about a meeting that was held, and obviously somebody leaked what happened at this meeting to the press. Tom Leonard says that the argument is kind of gathering momentum. In other words, it's not just anymore the usual accusations about the BBC, but somehow a penny is dropping. Do you think that's true? I mean,
I can't find much evidence to say that. I mean, it's unusual that we actually get to hear it. I mean, normally one gets the prepared statements put out, as was actually the conclusion that was reached before they actually had the meeting, and they put out a press release saying, well, of course, we're not biased, and was that Michael Grade or someone was... And, so we're used to that, but this time we actually got to see some evidence for it. But no, and I think a channel like Doughty Street is important exactly because that bias isn't going to go away.
Give that man a show.
This also, it reminded what you're saying about the BBC sort of revealing itself in its comedy. The Spooks thing reminded me a little bit of one of the BBC's great hit of recent years, Little Britain, the comedy series. The reason being that Little Britain, its success, is largely reliant on parodying a Britain that doesn't exist anymore, or a Britain that actually never existed. One of the most gratuitous and I think kind of unfunny Little Britain sketches was of the Women's Institute as sort of closeted racists, or not particularly closeted racists. The thing is that the Women's Institute, last time I looked, really weren't the great power in the land. Nor were all of the other things which Little Britain had in its sights. And it's kind of pathetic if you're going to pretend to be a cutting-edge comedy programme or a cutting-edge drama programme when you aim for old women, people with various disabilities, and think this is funny, and you don't have the balls to attack the real big issues.
But I think it was sort of the world outside London, which, as they were saying on some of that stuff about BBC bias, the BBC really doesn't necessarily understand. It's a very urban clique of media professionals who don't really engage with the rest of Britain and tend to think that the rest of Britain has sort of paleo-conservative views that they wouldn't like very much, and so they're quite happy to stereotype those.
I think I want to pick up on this point you make about Little Britain. Of course, it was trumpeted as being very politically incorrect. I couldn't see that there was anything... Did you see it, actually?
No, I watch it all the time. I think it's very funny, but for none of the right reasons.
But it's actually not... politically incorrect at all. I mean, for example, all the characters until this last series have been white, for example. Now, if you're really going to, do a caricature of modern Britain, aren't you going to have some caricatures of maybe Asians or West Indian people? As you say, it's very traditional targets.
Yeah, and the same thing always underlying it. Which is this amazing presumption that runs through it. I can't see why there isn't more anger about this. The amazing presumption that runs underneath it, that effectively white British people are just racists waiting to burst out. I mean, an enormous distrust of the British people. And I think the British people have a reason to feel angry about being portrayed in that way and being pandered to in that way.
Well, what made me nervous about the bias report is it's being reported that the liberals... that the BBC is filled with liberals, gays, and multiculturalists. And it's making it sound as the people who question the bias are anti-gays, liberals, and multiculturalists. I think this isn't exactly what we're anti-against, but this is really what's happening there. So I'm kind of nervous a bit about how it's being reported, and because when I say that the BBC is biased, people say, well, you're a fanatic.
Yeah.
And you hate gays, and everything else.
But also, they've actually, but by actually doing that, they've kind of captured the argument, captured the language. So if you do say, yes, this is terrible, you can automatically, as you say, seem homophobic,
Right,
racist,
exactly.
and whatever. It's a form of kind of cultural Marxism, almost, isn't it? That's sort of gone through the institutions in that way. Do you think that's pitching it too high?
I don't really. I mean, for me, the great scandal is that, first of all, there's been a great failure to represent the diversity of Muslim opinion, which one would think would fit in with a sort of liberal humanist agenda, really giving a sort of multifaceted image of Islam, global Islam, which of course takes so many dissident worlds. Our shocking failure to investigate or even acknowledge dissident opinion within both the British Muslim community and Islamic states abroad. There are dissident movements in countries like Iran, for example. We very, very rarely acknowledge the existence of such movements. There are extraordinarily diverse forms of of Islam across the world. Again, we really don't represent that, and to me it's made the entire debate, whether from a neocon or liberal humanist point of view, extraordinarily black and white. Moreover, I've always had the feeling that the what would you do then position has never been investigated.
Right.
I think one thing that Tom Leonard's piece certainly did establish very forcefully is that it's perfectly all right for anyone, whether at a serious or a news level or at a comedic level, to suggest without pause for thought or for breath that Bush is a warmongering moron. We may or may not agree with that, but the point is that that's just taken as read.
But
Yes,
this is the case, surely, isn't it? I mean, I remember this with Reagan and Thatcher.
Oh, it was always,
Yeah.
You know, and it seems to be that whenever we've got one on at the moment, apparently, and that is a real flourishing of comedy again. It seems to happen. It happened with Thatcher and Reagan. A huge number of new comics coming up who can basically get a laugh by saying just Bush.
It's laughter for people without humour.
Well,
I mean, it's laughter for dumb people. But it's a way you can get a laugh. If you're a fourth-rate comic wanting to make a splash, you can offend Bush. Well, that's fine, because George Bush isn't going to come and hunt you down. You can have your underground anti-Dick Cheney movement. But again, I mean, where's the serious cutting-edge stuff? Where are they actually bothering to pull their finger out? The problem, incidentally, if I can just say quickly about the BBC, is not just this thing of bias. We could have had this argument about bias at any point in BBC's history. The problem now is a combination of bias and ignorance. Ignorance at a very high up level in controllers and producers in the BBC,
Sorry, ignorance how?
Ignorance on fundamental, global issues of our day. It always amazes me how little BBC people who should be knowing more actually know at the moment. I don't want to name names, but I mean, you used to have to get into the BBC, know a hell of a lot. You had to jump through so many hoops and do so many exams, and you just don't see people with that knowledge anymore. You just don't see them in the BBC. They've got the bias, but they haven't got the knowledge.
well, they have a liberal tradition now. And I think it's difficult for the people who are on the upper levels who have just kind of come into this liberal tradition to distinguish the differences. So particularly with the understaffed, they're like, wait, we've been doing it wrong? Well, as a matter of fact, there is an entire other side to a lot of these issues.
But I was going to say, I mean, the interesting thing is not so much the bias, which is seems very obvious, but why they don't see it when it seems so obvious. It seems to me, what we're saying, there is a point of view from which they feel they have the entire circle of reasoned debate within their walls. And there's a wonderful book by Thomas Sowell, A Conflict of Visions, in which he says that it goes down very deep. It's really not a political discussion, it's a philosophical discussion, which is actually what I think Andrew Marr was saying as well. It's a certain view of human nature that if only we're all reasonable and we sit around and talk about things, we can come to an ideal solution. And anyone who disagrees with that must be either mad or wicked, because all reasonable people could surely see that we'll get there. So anyone right-wing becomes extremist, becomes out there. and not
there's
needing
a
to be part
sideline
of the
from
debate.
that, which is a terrible thing, where they just make moral parity between extreme opposite ends as they see it. I mean, I speak for myself. I find myself, on the BBC quite often on programs like that being, so they get me or neocon, they think, and then they get an Islamic extremist. I think I'm not sure that's the argument, and I'm not sure that an Islamic terrorist and I are just sort of opposite ends of the spectrum, and I rather find it offensive when that implication is made. But it is the sort of thing, let's get the opposite of each other, and then we'll find the middle ground. I don't actually think that is the case, and I think their vision of that is often very warped.
Does this argument seem familiar to you from an American point of view? I mean, does this fit out? I mean, we know we have people like Ann Coulter and draw attention
She's
to
not like
the
all of
media.
us.
She draws attention to the kind of liberal bias of the media. But on the whole, would you say that it's something people are aware of in the broadcast media, I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, especially because of Fox. Fox is a huge thing. But again, if you're a dedicated follower of Fox, people consider you to be, a bit of a fanatic. But at the same time, the ratings are amazing. So what you're saying, most of America is fanatical. Why are the ratings so good? I think that's indicative of the fact that they're finding a bias in other media outlets. And the worst thing that we have to deal with is the New York Times, not crimes, pardon me. All the news that's fit to print. But for us, I think it's a bit different. I don't think Americans understand that the public pays for the BBC. And I think that that's the thing that makes me so angry about this bias. Whereas in the States, that okay, things are biased, but it's not coming out of your pocket particularly, or directly.
There is a view, isn't there, that in a way, if you're ITV or whoever you are, I don't really care what your bias is, if I don't have to pay for it. But I was going to ask, because obviously you've been in television for, 15 years now or something, and I have too, obviously, myself. Do you think that, we're barking, not exactly up the wrong tree, but that we're sort of singling the BBC out? When it comes to the broadcast media, it seems to me, from my experience, that there is, on the whole, a kind of groupthink anyway about how these general issues are approached, how these basic issues should be approached. I mean, you're an arts program maker, for example. I mean, I would have thought...
Therefore, some would argue within the ivory tower of ITV, not at all in a representative position. I don't know. I mean, looking at ITV, I'd say actually that ITV has such a sort of strong tradition of commercialism and entrepreneurship. It was considered to be the sort of Barrow boy of British broadcasting for a long time after all, but it can't quite be seen in the Reithian tradition. It has some sort of public service duties, which it labours with, let's face it. However, what is interesting is that the writers that get to be auteurs on ITV are strongly from a leftist perspective, perhaps even more extremely and clearly so than the BBC auteurs. We have Jimmy McGovern, who's a true comrade. Then there's Paul Abbott. And even just recently with Prime Suspect, which we're going to talk about at some point, again, that's Linda LaPlante, not as squarely in that sort of macho socialist vein. Oh, Paul Greengrass is another very definitely leftist auteurs.
But you see, the point, I think this is obviously undoubtedly true, but how, are we actually approaching this in the wrong way? It's all very well to complain, isn't it? But in that case, is it a case that there are no good writers coming from another tradition? Let's not just say right-wing tradition, another tradition, or is it just simply down to the commissioning editors? I mean,
there's a standing offer at the National Theatre. I mean, they accept themselves as a sort of institutionally leftist organisation, but they've said, we will put on a right-wing play as soon as anyone writes one good enough.
But what they mean by right-wing play, I mean, we're treated all the time to kind of plays about Pinochet and co. From a leftist perspective. I mean, I'd love to see a play about Allende or something, but I mean, the problem is that they actually wouldn't put it on. I mean, they wouldn't, because they will not concede the crimes of communism, because they will not concede the murders committed by the left, They consider the Right to be the organisation that just organises genocide, mass killings and brutality. And they're not going to put something about that on. I very much doubt anyone's going to write it. So that's not actually right-wing. What would be nice would be to see some kind of conservatively minded play. That's a different thing.
I want to broaden it out. We were talking about different channels. I mean, Channel 4 this week had this dispatches discussion, which was about Muslims and free speech. Now, I suppose that Channel 4 considers itself to be thought of alternative, if there is such a thing still, doesn't it? And very cutting edge and saying things other people won't. I'll be honest with you, I'm becoming very juvenile in my old age. If I think something's coming, I increasingly turn it. I cannot bear to listen to it. And I lasted for about 10 minutes of this. You actually saw it through, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, out of a sense of duty for something I'm writing at the moment, rather than out of any pleasure. It was a monstrous event. I mean, it really can't be stressed enough. Channel 4's dispatches decided to debate the issue of whether or not Muslims are threatening freedom of speech. I had a couple of friends on it, which is why I was watching it, and they had a fairly hard time in studio. What was absolutely appalling was that halfway through this debate on whether or not Islam is threatening freedom of speech, the presenter, Jon Snow, announced that he had the Danish cartoons in his hand, as if they were some kind of contraband, and announced that there was going to be a vote from the studio audience as to whether or not they should show them. Which, after all, in a debate about the issue, is simply informing people. It's not doing anything, it's just informing people what you're discussing. And a vast majority, 60 to 70% of the audience, voted to show the cartoons. At which point Jon Snow opened an envelope from the directors of Channel 4, which said, we don't want to provoke anyone, therefore the cartoons won't be shown on Channel 4. I mean, spinelessness has never seemed more obvious, but what's more obvious even than that, even than the spinelessness, was the sheer sort of, I mean, gobsmacking irony of this. And at the end of the evening, the audience voted that Islam is not censoring freedom of speech. Well, if Islam is not censoring freedom of speech, we should have the cartoons up all the time. We should be saying what we want to say about their prophet. But they don't. Channel 4 was demonstrating that they are kowtowing to Islam, and are being cowed by Islamists, that they are cowards, and that in the face of this, when this is demonstrated live on air, no one even laughs.
But to be fair to Channel 4, I mean, South Park, which a lot of people would say has conservative edge to it, and certainly a programme that's not afraid to offend people. It'd be hard to accuse them of being cowardly. Now, they were going to show, I'm not sure they were going to show the cartoons or something involving Muhammad, but they came to the conclusion that, in fact, that was too dangerous for them too. And I wouldn't. And they, in the end, decided that they could show Christ defecating on the American flag, and that would be the best way of showing the freedoms of America, as opposed. That was the best way of dealing with the problem of Islam, because they couldn't show it. And I think it's a general, almost a health and safety problem. These large organisations who mediate our experience can't afford, on behalf of their employees, to put those employees at risk by showing these things. Yeah, so it's very hard for them to be brave on behalf of other people.
I think that's such a good point, and I think there really is genuine fear about those health and safety issues. That's actually the most efficient way of putting it. However, isn't it incredible that we're only really just beginning to deal with these issues of free speech, however many years down the line we are after the invasion of Iraq, when clearly for me, again, it sort of beggared belief that we weren't doing with the collision of a liberal humanist tradition with an Islamist tradition. They are in total conflict. There is no meeting point. There is no nice conversation to be had. And if broadcasters, I mean, they're now having to confront these issues, whether or not they wish to, because there's such a genuine groundswell of opinion in popular culture. There's a growing awareness that these are impossible contradictions. And yet, so however many years later, finally, it's creeping into the broadcast mainstream.
Yes.
It should have been dealt with so long ago.
Well, unfortunately, I think the groundswell is still, when you're talking to people on the street, they're like, we shouldn't offend anybody, we shouldn't offend anybody. But they don't consider their rights to be of any importance. And would these individuals, the only people who don't have rights to freedom of speech are non-Muslims. I mean, and that's scary to me. But at the same time, you know, the individual news companies or organizations that are afraid to put it out for fear of retribution is so sad, because it seems to me, if anything, everybody should be showing it. all of our responsibilities to show the cartoons, so you can't kill us all at once.
Exactly, and you need, sort of being unified in the face of this would be the best way to deal with it. But there is one important thing to stress from this as well, which is that is that what Channel 4 and so on have been propagating is the notion that you have the right in this society not to be offended. You have no such right. You have a right to life, you have a right to certain other freedoms, including the freedom of speech, which is one that is now being trampled on a daily basis. But you do not have the right to not be offended. There is no such right in this country, and I hope there never will be. And there is certainly not an exclusive right of Islam not to be offended.
Well, I think the thing is, it's actually the evidence is not very encouraging. I mean, next week, I think, is the second anniversary of Theo van Gogh's death, isn't it?
Murder.
Yes, who was murdered for making the film Submission. I don't see any great sort of standing up, if you like, for our particular
not one Hollywood actor, not one of the directors bothered to show solidarity with a member of their own profession. No. They were too busy showing solidarity with fake causes.
Yes, or McCarthyism, actually, in the case of George Clooney. We should actually sort of go on to a little bit of a lighter thing. It's not, it couldn't be heavier, actually. But to round off, Prime Suspect came to an end. I think it's worth talking about Prime Suspect because it's always put forward as the very best sort of TV drama and the achievement in TV drama. What did you think of how it signed off, actually, Susan? I remember you said something very interesting to me. I wonder if you remember. It might have been we might have been in a bit of a haze at the time, but that in fact it was, but that it was actually remarkably realistic in its portrayal of her as a professional woman, and I thought that was interesting.
Well, as an older working woman myself, I'm fed up of sort of chirpy articles in the Daily Mail saying, Ashley, it's great to be divorced and single and childless. There was a classic by Chris Evans' ex-wife, and they say, it's marvelous. The article, obviously, 100% motivated by personal bitterness, of course. But I was quite moved by, yes, the picture of Miriam, the very lonely, aging, professional woman. She is, again, childless. She's got great guilt about her various familial responsibilities. She's sliding into alcoholism. And I was moved by that because I think it's a truer reflection of the problems of gender relations at this moment in time and women's role in the workplace than we're accustomed to in television. I think the tendency is to sort of sanitize all of these things, where in fact the fact is that there are legions of very dissatisfied older working women who've been locked out of the boardroom, as we know. Yes. The continuing exclusion of women from the boardroom has flourished under New Labour, only 4% across big business.
Good Lord. I was going to come in, actually, on that point. It's something you mentioned earlier, that in fact even Prime Suspect managed to get its political thing in, didn't it? That in fact it was set in this, I mean, do you know, it was set in this multicultural sort of situation, environment, and yet the actual culprit was the little middle-class white girl, wasn't it, at the end?
Right, yeah.
Oh,
No. Go ahead.
Well, no, I suppose so, but I thought it was too good to make that critique of it, really.
You thought it was very, very good.
This is popular entertainment rising to the point where it almost becomes art. It's remarkable, I thought. The psychological perception, it was actually, as Susan was saying, it was true. It was psychologically perceptive about the perils of self-sufficiency, about the power that children have to manipulate adults, and about many other things. And I think that idea of it turning out to be the middle-class family was more of a traditional trope of sort of the darkness behind the middle-class facade that you get in many detective stories. So.
Well, I think that on that nice pro-television point, I think we have to wrap up because we've come to the end. But thank you very much. Thanks very much to my guests here, and we'll see you next week on Culture Clash.